First, thank you, Alvin, and your staff for this wonderful opportunity. So, supersessionism, ID theft. The late Simon Wiesenthal often said that what began with the Jews never ends with them. And anti-Semitic terrorism in Europe today has gone viral, yet the gulf and the disconnect between, on the one hand, the political circles, the media, public opinion in Europe, without any empathy for their fellow victims of the same type of terrorism in Israel is striking. The question is, if the Jew is the canary in the mine, then why is he abandoned when all the miners are now threatened? And maybe what I am going to call the campaign for identity theft is a contributing factor. ID theft follows a route map from Durban through the World Social Forum, from UNISPAL, which I'll explain in a minute, to the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. Now, in 2000, I had the bizarre privilege of being the only Jew elected to the International Steering Committee of the World Conference Against Racism to take place in Durban in August and September 2001. But for the 2 years before the conference, I attended the prep-coms in Geneva, Strasbourg, Warsaw, and Santiago. I was denied access to the last one, which was in Tehran. But at the one in Geneva, I was sitting in a drafting session on Holocaust denial when the Palestinian Legal Council crept up behind me and whispered in my ear, "If you give us Palestine, we will give you the Holocaust." And a Dutch colleague snapped the outrage on my face for posterity. Arrival in Durban. After a couple of days, I was unceremoniously expelled from the International Steering Committee. I was dubbed the World Jew and therefore had no right to be there. Jewish participants were shell-shocked, and there are some here who went through that experience, but Durban was the place where a latter-day supersessionism and replacement theology was indeed born. It started etymologically. First of all, we've already heard about the two anti-Semitisms, and in the Tehran prepcom, there it was suggested that in 1948, with the triumph of Zionism, anti-Semitism was now directed against the other Semite, so it was Arabophobia, and by an Orwellian newspeak, Zionism thereby became anti-Semitism. Next with the, well, in the language of the Pesach Haggadah, who knows the three Holocausts. The first Holocaust was, in fact, transatlantic slave trade. The second, contemporary trafficking in women and children. And the third, the Nakba. There was no Jewish Holocaust. Durban ended on the 8th of September, 72 hours before 9/11. On the 6th of December, I was somehow, and I don't know how, but invited to Geneva for the last and final meeting before dissolution of the International Steering Committee. On arrival, I was told I wasn't welcome, but there were UN officials in the room, so I couldn't be physically removed. On each seat, there was a blue piece of paper, and on it was an 8-point post-urban plan which was built on the Sullivan principles against apartheid South Africa. 1. An educational inculcation campaign through all UN agencies on apartheid Israel. 2. A legal campaign in the International Court of Justice for Israeli crimes against humanity and war crimes. 3. Cancellation of the law of return for Jews. And 4. Its replacement by a Palestinian right of return, a lauda, for 67 and 48 refugees. 5. A re-establishment of an enhanced economic embargo, no longer in Damascus. Number 6, cultural, scientific, sports, academic, tourist embargoes, which today we know as BDS. 7, the rupture of diplomatic relations in rendering Israel a pariah state. And 8, penalties for the states and NGOs that refused to comply. And attached there was another page. It was an appendix of proposed financial sponsors. The document was snatched away from me. The ISCA denied paternity. But this has been the route map for the last 15 years. And I think that That's an important point in history. The vector for the post-Durban program was the Anti-Globalization World Social Forum, headquartered in Porto Alegre, Brazil, where we were born, and its regional satellite, the European Social Forum. The World Social Forum is now a focal point for extreme leftists, green ecologists, pacifists, church liberals, asylum seekers, migrant groups, and indigenous, along with Islamist radicals, to commingle, what we now call intersectionality. It is also a global apparatus for recruitment, opinion molding, agenda setting, resource seeking, image building, hijacked for the Palestinian cause. It is there that the big lies are refined for media coverage, lawsuits and campus campaigns. It's there that we learn the calendar, the slogans, and the dramatis personae. So, for example, 18 months before the flotilla sailed and the flotilla flew, we had already the details, and they stuck mostly to it, except that they had intended to call the lead ship the Exodus II, which they didn't dare to do. But attendance is a soul-shattering experience. You're standing in a stadium with thousands of young people screaming "Viva la Intifada Global." There were these weird, huge banners saying, and I still don't understand it, Nazis, Yankees, Jews, no more chosen peoples. There is carnival-style marching to the samba beat in Porto Alegre, and mulatto indigenous gaze against Zionism, and every nauseating anti-Semitic expression possible as trial balloons for replication in Europe and beyond. The early World WSF rallies catered legitimately to victims of slavery and sexual abuse and trafficking, but by 2012, it had become totally hijacked as WSF Free Palestine. 127 seminars on how to best harm the Jewish state, and by association the Jewish people and their supporters or friends. I noted the opening words by a British imam. In the struggle, Israel is only the tip of the iceberg. If the Zionist entity were on the other side of the Mediterranean, our enemy is still the Jew. No longer al-Kitab, people of the book, deserving dhimmi protection. He is a forger, an impostor, murderer of the prophet, falsifying archaeology with no tie to Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Now, just to run very quickly through the 16 points of the WSF program. Dismantling the apartheid wall, ending the apartheid regime, the right of return, BDS strategies, academic and cultural boycotts, containing Judaization, lifting the Gaza siege, recognition of Israeli Arabs as part of an indigenous people, release of Palestinian prisoners, legal issues at international courts, sovereignty over natural resources, which is land, water, food, to end Israel's foreign trade treaties with the European Union and the Latin American Mercosur, military embargo, and this is interesting, support for anti-Zionist Jews everywhere, activate media on Israeli colonialist racism, and finally, support popular resistance to the occupation, which is, it intimates violence. But they added a 17th, the religious dimension. There was a workshop on the Kairos document, and we witnessed a direct ID theft of the Jewish religious narrative, proclaiming the racism of such terms as chosen people, promised land. And a few weeks later, the debate went from Porto Alegre to Edinburgh, where the Scottish Church proffered, we are all chosen peoples, and the land is promised to all. The interstice between civil society and 21 member states and 21 alternate states is UNISPAL. It has the horrible full title of the UN Committee for the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. It's part of the UN Division for Palestinian Rights, which is a unique fabrication. Meets once a year on each continent, and 2 Israelis are picked to be brought to each. At the Rome meeting, they offered a plan, the 2 Israelis, to attack JNF, Jewish National Fund, and Teva Pharmaceuticals as agents of the occupation. UNISPAL chair Abdou Salim Diallo of Senegal quoted Ayatollah Khomeini, a drop of water on a rock does nothing. Continuous dripping destroys the rock. Another important comment by a UN official. There are no non-combatants in Israel, as women serve in the army and youth in paramilitary movements. All are legitimate targets. I would like to venture that the continuous dripping of the water has created, through media attrition, a visceral, subliminal public response. The words Jew, Israel, and Zionism now evoke a biased synaptic reaction, cognitive differentiation based on deep-rooted prejudices, and it's rather like it's snap assumptions, like the Hollywood black hat cowboys who were by definition bad guys, and the white hats as good guys. The word Jew and its associated homonyms are no longer neutral, no longer received with indifference. Both qualitatively and quantitatively, they increasingly evoke the dark side. Coming back now to ID theft and heritage. The Prussian military strategist Karl von Clausewitz defined diplomacy as war by other means. I suggest that today, heritage is war by every means. The vector is the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO, an organization highly valued for its professionalism in preserving protected sites, specifically when we needed their intervention with Poland to remove the discotheque located within the protected area of Auschwitz. Since Palestine's entry into UNESCO in November 2011, the World Heritage Committee has been hijacked to the ferocious appetite of ID theft. The Cave of the Patriarchs, Machpelah, in Hebron, and the Tomb of Rachel in Bethlehem have been reclassified as mosques. By a stratagem, and against the decision of the World Heritage Committee professional consultants, Palestine obtained the Church of the Nativity and the Bethlehem pilgrimage route, even after the historic church had been occupied by Fatah terrorists. Since the church's inscription on the heritage list for Palestine, PLO leaders have now designated Jesus as Palestinian. The 2014 World Heritage Committee in Qatar, again against professional objections, Palestine received Batir, in Hebrew Beitar, the site of Bar Kokhba's revolt against Roman occupation and the last stand of sovereign Jewish independence in the land of Israel. Palestine's wish list today includes the Qumran Caves and the Dead Sea Scrolls. We annually monitor the Frankfurt Book Fair, and that's why I'm coming to the books now, for anti-Semitism and other hate on the stands, which can serve as a sort of low-tech arm for recruitment to jihad. Last summer, as you'll see in a second, we also vetted 5 Arab book fairs: Casablanca, Doha, Abu Dhabi, Muscat, and Riyadh. So, I can just come over here. Okay, this is Casablanca. Very rapidly, you'll see that the books, the guest of honor last year was the State of Palestine. You'll see that the books are very heavily in the area of conspiracy theories. This is the Doha International Book Fair, which was opened by the Minister of Culture of Qatar. Here we have Muscat, or Oman, and then now I come to this. Well, I should cut it. It's just a little bit something. Is it okay? Is it clear?
It's okay.
Okay, very good. So by the time the Frankfurt Book Fair opened in November of last year, we already had 51 delinquent publishers whose books in the Arab book fairs had proven that their presence in Frankfurt would violate the contract which prohibits, the contract of the fair, which prohibits anything which foments violence or hate. We have an agreement with the director of the book fair, Jürgen Boos, and by the time we arrived, those 51 delinquent publishers were banned. They were not there. We give an annual Worst Offender Award, and Qatar has won twice in series. Now, we also reported on hate texts at the fair, which were translated into English, French, German, and Spanish, for the fear that these texts would be used in the vernacular of schools in Europe and maybe in the Americas. and making this very same presentation, but shorter, at the European Parliament committee, pointing to the danger of these infiltrating schools. 2 weeks later, because a member of the Conservative Party of England was in the committee, David Cameron spoke of this threat and promised countermeasures in the UK. Now, at the Frankfurt Book Fair, we did discover this. It's published by a Hamas front, the Burak Wall, claiming that Muhammad, on his legendary flight from Mecca via Jerusalem to heaven, there were no direct flights in those days, tethered his winged steed Burak to a wall that bears his name. It's the Kotel, or the Western Wall, part of the temple complex, Judaism's holiest site. The book claims that the wall was stolen by a Jewish conspiracy and must be... Okay, worshipping near the wall is a new heresy, Jewish aggressions, the wall is the gate of the Jews, etc. Okay, so it's clear that this book is part of a campaign. It's not a simple thing. And the book claims that the wall was stolen and must be returned to the embrace of Islam. At last year's World Heritage Committee in Bonn, the target was the Kotel in a joint Palestinian-Jordanian resolution, claiming it as part of the Mughrabi ascent to the Haram al-Sharif and Al-Aqsa. We lobbied with friendly states, and especially with the host, Germany, who did not want the embarrassment of this passing in their jurisdiction. So the paragraph was suspended until the World Heritage Committee of this year, which will be taking place in a very neutral place in Istanbul. The Museum of Palestinian Heritage, it's under construction in Ramallah. It claims that in Ramallah until it can be moved to Jerusalem, and it calls itself a safe place for unsafe ideas and will be a new arm for de-Judaization, in the spirit of Qatar's call for Jerusalem to be returned to its pre-Jewish authenticity and integrity. And I think this underlines that denial of a people's heritage is tantamount to its deletion from history and geography. And bottom line, the zero-sum equation is devastating. The validation of Palestine ipso facto requires the deletion of the Jewish heritage. Thus the obstinacy in refusing recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. The objection is the total deconstruction of the Zionist exercise, which I would call cataclysmic anti-Semitism. It's a mutation which was unforeseen in the withdrawn EU definition, or in the OSCE Berlin Declaration, or even in Durban where the seeds were sown. Much more dangerous than anti-Semitic terrorism or other manifestations of violence, this ID theft, I believe, endangers posterity and condemns us to isolation. And it's a battle that has to be won. One response to set the record straight has been our exhibition, People Book Land, the 3,500-year relationship of the Jewish people with the Holy Land, or the Land of Israel, authored by the late Robert Wistridge. It opened in June 2014 against all odds and 4 delays in UNESCO in Paris. After that, in 2015, it went on to the UN in New York, US Congress, the Knesset, and finally in December in the Vatican in Rome. When I leave here tomorrow, I'm on my way to Podgorica, Montenegro, where we will be opening it because Montenegro was the very first state to co-sponsor the exhibition, even before the United States and Canada and even Israel. And then to the Copenhagen Town Hall, and we await the date for the Palace of Westminster, the British Parliament. And we think that that's the level, and then afterwards it will obviously go onto the internet, and we hope it's a good tool. And if anybody here has any other suggestions for a concerted campaign, we would be very interested. This is the kind of pushback required. I believe that apathy is unthinkable. To end, perhaps Lord Byron's nightmare challenge in the Hebrew melodies is never more ominous. Tribes of wandering feet and weary breast, how shall ye flee away and be at rest? The wild dove hath her nest, the fox his cave, mankind their country, Israel of the grave. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Landis is, as you will read, the distinguished medievalist who's given us the excellent Heaven on Earth millennialism volume, as well as an indispensable volume on the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Not mentioned in his bio is that he is also the blogger who has done excellent work to reveal the meaning of the Goldstone Report, the Aldura affair, and much else, as well as a pioneer in analyzing cognitive warfare. Richard Landis.
Thank you. So fortunately, because of James Wald's talk, I don't have to explain what supersessionism or replacement theology is. So let me skip the theological discussion and turn to the psychological. Here we encounter a phenomenon that shares with here we encounter a phenomenon of malicious envy.